This presentation is part of a series on the implementation of the new liability management framework introduced by the Government of Alberta in July of 2020. We will focus on the impacts of Directive 88 on security collection. This presentation will touch briefly on the new liability management framework and go through the new requirements pertaining to security in Directive 88. The Government of Alberta introduced the new liability management framework, and the AER was directed to implement new liability management programs based on the policy announced. The framework encompasses the 5 components shown. As highlighted in the red box on the slide, this presentation discusses how the Holistic Licensee Assessment, supported by the Licensee Capability Assessment, the LCA, is applied to security determination, calculation, and refund under Directive 88. In response to the government's policy direction, the AER delivered regulatory changes on December 1, 2021, which included the release of Directive 88. Directive 88 introduces the holistic assessment of licensees across the energy development lifecycle, which includes a multi-factor approach to assess licensees, including Section 4.5 of Directive 67 Unreasonable Risks, the Licensee Capability Assessment factors, and any other factor considered appropriate in the circumstance. Directive 88 is supported by Manual 23, which provides further details on how the holistic licensee assessment factors will be used for regulatory decision-making on security determination and refund, as we move away from solely using the liability management rating, the LMR, to consider the holistic licensee assessment and the risks presented. It is important to note that the current version of Directive 88 will be built in phases. It will continue to evolve with the future releases as we fully implement the LMF and replace the licensee liability rating program. We will provide more context on security deposits and refunds as we go through the presentation. It is well established that the LMR, which uses the ratio of licensees' assets and liabilities to assess its ability to address end-of-life obligations, was limiting. It often triggered security demand too late in the life cycle when there was little ability to attain the security from distressed licensees. The LMR program was unsuccessful in incenting licensees to conduct closure work, which resulted in rates of closure that did not keep pace with the growth of inactive liability in the province. One objective of the liability management framework is to ensure industry retains the liability for the development by paying security when required and the orphan fund levy. Under the new framework, our focus is on reducing the liability consequences to Alberta through the inventory reduction program. The AER also focuses on incenting licensee behavior, first through numerous mitigation methods, relying on security only when those behaviors have not changed. Therefore, security is a secondary mitigative measure, as we would rather see the money go towards closure work. Security determination uses holistic assessments to define when and how much security is required to offset the cost of a licensee's liability. Ultimately, the AER needs to support the backstop, which is the OWA, when there is a higher risk of a licensee leaving costs of closure to the end of the life cycle. The AER also considers security in situations when there is a concern that the licensee is not able or willing to cover the cost of care and custody, and for the protection of the public and environment. Using security in these scenarios reduces the burden on financially healthy and capable companies to fund the OWA as the oil and gas sector continues to mature. The AER has broad authority under Section 1.1 of the Oil and Gas Conservation Rules to require security deposits across the energy development lifecycle in order to offset the cost of closure, provide care and custody of infrastructure and sites, and when the regulator considers it appropriate, to carry out activities to ensure the protection of the public and the environment. We have the flexibility to use security as a regulatory tool to manage a licensee's behavior and mitigate any risk that it may not be able to appropriately abandon or reclaim well sites or facilities. Directive 68 provides additional details for what a security deposit may be used for, when it could be required, and the conditions in which a refund may be granted. As the AER works to implement the new liability management framework in phases, the security collection framework will also be updated. This is the first phase of improvements to security collection as the AER transitions to the broader security framework to replace the liability management rating outlined in Directive 6. In Directive 88, when considering whether to require security for deposits and determining the amount of security, the AER will consider the holistic licensee assessment. Based on this initial assessment, the AER will then apply further scrutiny to determine the potential need for security to mitigate the potential risks. The maximum amount of security that may be required is the licensee's total liabilities, which involve the cost of providing care and custody and the cost to permanently end operations, including abandonment, remediation, and reclamation of the site. One key outcome of the new liability management framework is to have closure work completed proactively to reduce liabilities, which is preferred over securitization. The holistic licensee assessment is the starting point in determining whether security is needed. Phase 1 includes security determination for the inventory reduction program, transfers, parts of the licensee management program, and other factors like offsetting the costs of activities for reasonable care and measures. Phase 2, which will be marked by the second release of Directive 88, will complete the transition from the LMR security to the new, fully implemented security framework, which is part of the complete rollout of the licensee management program. It is important to note that when the directive is released in Phase 2, there will be refinements for the inventory reduction and transfer security processes to ensure continued alignment with the overall security framework. In the review, first, licensees applying for a transfer will undergo a holistic licensee assessment under Directive 88. Then, based on the assessment, the AER will focus on specific factors for further scrutiny to identify the risks. Risks are identified based on the decision being made and the outcomes to be met or managed. Once risks are identified, the AER will use a suite of regulatory tools for appropriate mitigation. Examples of actions the AER may take could include, but are not limited to, meeting with a licensee to discuss the specific situation and where AER sees opportunities for improvement, additional AER oversight, undertaking random inspections or increased audits, requiring the licensee to undertake additional monitoring and submissions of reports, directing the licensee to prepare a closure plan and require specific timing of closure activities, requiring the licensee to provide security to mitigate potential risks and address end-of-life obligations. This is a key regulatory tool that can be used as a condition of approval on transfer applications. When determining the amount of security to collect to mitigate potential risks, the AER will first consider the holistic licensee assessment, and then narrow in and apply further scrutiny to specific factors with a focus on the following LCA factors: financial health, estimated total magnitude of liability, remaining lifespan of mineral resources and infrastructure, the rate of closure activities and spending, and the pace of inactive liability growth. Factors outlined in Section 6 of Directive 88 may also be used for calculating the amount of security that the AER could require, including as a condition of transfer. The value of liability under Directive 11 includes marginal liability for wells that are less than or equal to 1.59 cubic meters of oil equivalent per day, which is 10 barrels of oil equivalent per day. Inactive liability for wells as defined in Directive 13. Inactive liabilities for facilities, which is defined as facilities with no activity for 12 months. In addition, the value of site-specific liability as outlined in Directive 1. Remaining lifespan of resource parameters, which evaluates the expected longevity of a licensee's mineral resources and infrastructure and the extent of which existing operations may fund current and future liabilities. This data supports determining a quantifiable amount of security needed to offset the potential risk the transfer poses to the OWA or Albertans should a licensee become defunct. The AER has the discretion to collect any other amount it considers appropriate in any given circumstances, as outlined in the Oil and Gas Conservation Rules, Section 1.1, subsection 5. To offset any potential increase in risk that may arise from a license transfer, the transferor or transferee may be required to provide a security deposit to the AER as a condition of the approval. The amount of security required as a result of a transfer application takes into account the licenses being transferred as well as those remaining with the current licensee, also known as the transferor. Considerations include the liability of the licenses being transferred, a company's financial health, and the crossover timeline parameters in the LCA. More detail on how the company's financial distress and the crossover timeline fit into the security calculation model will be outlined in the slides ahead. Transferees, or the licensee receiving the transferred licenses, should consider how the licenses being transferred will impact their capacity to sustain operations and address regulatory and liability obligations in the post-transfer state. Transferors should consider how transferring out licenses will impact their financial health and the remaining mineral resources and infrastructure, as well as their ability to continue to fund current and future liabilities. If the post-transfer results increase the risk of a transferor meeting its obligations, transfer security may be required to maintain the pre-transfer state. Licensees looking to estimate the amount of security that may be required for their license transfers can consider the information found in One Stop. LCA reports are licensee specific, as are the liability estimates available in the Liability Assessment Report, a new report that has been created in relation to the liability management framework. As a result, liability estimates can temporarily be found in two AER systems, DDS and One Stop. Licensees are encouraged to use the new One Stop report, as the reports in DDS include overrides that distort Directive 11 calculations and will eventually be retired when Directive 6 is rescinded and the LLR and LMR are discontinued and replaced. The One Stop Liability Assessment Report is similar to the DDS report, but includes liability for all suite multi-well batteries and updated active and inactive infrastructure. Liabilities continue to be estimated using Directive 1, 6, 11, 24, and 75. The AER promotes transparency, and we encourage licensees to share information when considering business transactions. However, the decision to share information from the LCA and the Liability Assessment Report lies with each licensee. This initial security model is a component of the larger security framework that is still under development. To help provide a level of certainty for licensees, the AER is providing some information on the amount of security that could be requested as a condition of approval when considering a risk and performance-based approach. The AER evaluated and used data from a sample of transfer applications in 2021. Based on the sample, a model was created to provide security ranges for differing combinations of crossover timeline and levels of financial distress. This model will keep being refined as new data becomes available with the implementation of Directive 88 and as the AER continues to consider the industry performance. The security ranges and crossover timeline may also be updated as the new liability management is fully implemented and the broader security framework is developed. Factors in the risk group of the LCA are used to assess the level of financial distress and are categorized as low, medium, or high. These factors evaluate the likelihood of a licensee being able to fund their regulatory and liability obligations. Level of financial distress is determined by analyzing the financial information required annually or as directed by AER through Directive 67. Widely accepted financial ratios distinguish licensees that are financially healthy versus those that are in distress. In the performance group of the LCA, Remaining lifespan of resources is a factor that evaluates the expected longevity of the licensee's mineral resources and infrastructure, as well as the ability of current operations to fund required closure activities. The crossover timeline parameters within this group is considered in the security transfer model. As outlined in Directive 88, the crossover timeline is the estimate of the time frame when magnitude of liability will exceed future income potential from remaining production. The crossover timeline is a snapshot in time and is being used as an indicator of near-term risk and is not forecasting the sustainability of the sector. It is important to note that crossover timeline is based on predefined thresholds rather than a peer comparison. The crossover timeline also does not take into consideration any future changes or actions that may improve the situation of the licensee. The security model considers the licensee's level of financial distress and the crossover timeline post-transfer. Based on where the licensee falls within these two parameters, a range of security is determined. The total security amount will consider other components of the holistic licensee assessment, such as the estimated total magnitude of liability, other parameters in the remaining lifespan of mineral resources and infrastructure, as well as parameters in the closure performance group, such as pace of an inactive liability trend. To understand the liability considered in a transfer application, Section 5.1 of Manual 23 outlines the liability that is used. This liability, along with the licensee's level of financial distress and crossover timeline post-transfer, provides the range of security. For example, if the liability included in the transfer application is $100 and the licensee has a high level of financial distress and a crossover timeline post-transfer that is near, the security requested could be $95 to $100. Now that we have discussed security determination and calculation, we will briefly discuss the process for security refund. Requests for security refund are treated as applications because a decision is being requested. They follow a similar application process as license transfer applications. Outlined is a summary of the process. Submission of the request to the AER. A formal written request on company letterhead is submitted by email to directive68@aer.ca to be considered as an application for security refund. The AER will only refund to the licensee that placed the security deposit or to a trustee, receiver, or receiver manager. Application is reviewed for accuracy, then registered, and posted on the public notice of application. Anyone believing that they are directly or adversely impacted by the licensee application for security refund has the opportunity to submit a statement of concern. Directive 88 and its predecessor, Directive 6, operated in paramount to Directive 68, and under those directives, security refunds are and were, by convention, treated as applications. As part of the AER's implementation of the liability management framework, it is planning to review Directive 68 and will add clarity to this portion of the requirements. The holistic licensee assessment is used, which may trigger further scrutiny of the licensee and the request. Further scrutiny may be triggered by unreasonable risks in Directive 67, key LCA factors such as the licensee's level of financial distress, estimated total magnitude of liability, remaining lifespan of mineral resources and infrastructure, rate of closure activities, and spending and pace of inactive liability growth. Please note this list is not inclusive, as we may consider other factors when warranted. The review includes assessing security requirements for any and all liability management programs as outlined in Directive 68 in order to make the application decision. The AER's review of security refund requests include potential risks posed to other liability management programs where security is collected, and a licensee's compliance with AER requirements. These include Directive 6, 24, and 75. To pull it all together, the AER's liability management program is now extended to include the holistic licensee assessment and the new licensee management and inventory reduction programs. Refund requests are reviewed based on the new requirements outlined in Directive 88 and any other existing liability management program. The AAR understands that security held has been collected under criteria provided in Directive 6 and that we may have collected security to offset the LMR threshold. However, this is not the only consideration for refund of security as outlined in Directive 68. With the release of Directive 88, the request for refund is subject to meeting requirements provided in Directive 88 as well as those in Directive 68. Revisions to Directive 6 will occur in phases as we transition away from the LLR program and implement the programs outlined in the new directive. The replacement of the LMR security and the full transition away from the LLR program will be completed in phases over the next few years. If the holistic licensee assessment and the review of other liability management programs indicate a potential risk and security is still required to offset that risk, then security will not be refunded. If the assessment and review indicate that the risk has been sufficiently reduced, a full or partial refund of security may be warranted. A licensee that is compliant with Directive 68 and other AAR requirements and is no longer required to provide security deposits under any AAR liability management program or policy is eligible for a refund of its security deposits. Again, the holistic assessment and review of a licensee's application for security refund are used to make a decision. Applicants will be notified when a decision is made. The decision could be to approve a full or partial refund or to deny the application. Refund requests may be closed if they are not submitted as complete or if supplemental information is not provided as requested. The AAR is unable to provide an advance review of the refund request due to unknown information. The timeline for decision is 45 business days. We know licensees want to know how to interact and obtain clarity from the AAR in order to understand the new holistic assessment, how it is being applied, and what it means to their specific company. We have identified additional ways for licensees to obtain clarity. A pre-application meeting may be requested by emailing one of the 3 mailboxes listed here in advance of an application filing. We will require licensees to provide an agenda in advance of the meeting to assess the topic and research any issues if required. Pre-application meetings will discuss process and will not offer predetermination of a decision. When filing an application, licensees can provide a letter detailing the concerns they have with their LCA results, along with all supporting documents. The AAR will investigate these concerns as part of the application review process and determine whether action is required. After receiving an application decision, licensees may file a regulatory appeal under Part 3 of the AAR Rules of Practice. However, during the appeal time period of 30 days, we cannot provide any information on the decision under appeal. Licensees are reminded of this avenue on any application. The liability management inbox is where questions should be directed outside any of the above situations. This mailbox is monitored throughout the day. Each email is triaged and sent to the applicable team. We strive to reply within 5 business days. However, this time may be extended due to the volume of inquiries we have received and the complexity of the questions. The AAR also offered a series of information sessions in order to inform licensees of the new requirements and processes under the new liability management framework and the holistic licensee assessment. Please visit the event page of the AAR for further information on future opportunities or to see other presentations in this series. For further information, please visit aer.ca to view Directive 88 and the manual. More information on the programs introduced by Directive 88 is also available on the website. Thank you for your interest in the new liability management framework and the impacts on security determination, calculation, and refunds. Please check back frequently to the AAR website for new developments.